Hi, Misha here. I figured I might as well wrap up the collection from Eaglemoss of diecast model ships from the Battlestar Galactica universe. The collection encompasses both the original series and the reimagined one. In the first video I just kind of did on New Year's Eve while waiting for other stuff to do. I looked at the capital ships. I looked at 3 Battlestars and 2 base stars. And then following up on that, I looked at 3 Vipers and 3 Raiders in a second video. And with 11 of the 13 in the series done, I figured why not do a third video just to wrap things up. And both of these models are quite recent to the collection, and both are from the reimagined series. On the left here, we have the Colonial Raptor. Specifically, this is Boomer's Raptor, as seen from the miniseries onward. And also, as seen from the miniseries onward, we have the most recent one, Colonial 1, which I still insist looks better flipped upside down, as I did in that kind of Christmas Eve video. I don't know, I think this just seems more of a flow. But okay, we'll do this one with it technically right side up, I guess, since you insist. Whew. I did not include the Raptor in the fighters video because it's really not a fighter. Well, it is a support craft, a multi-role craft. It's kind of a jack of all trades. Now, this is not a shuttle as such. The Colonial military does have true transport shuttles. This is more akin to something like the real world EA6, which was or is an electronic warfare version of the A6 Intruder. And I have done a video on that one, although I should probably revisit it. But unlike the EA6, this does have transport ability. In its primary role, this is a scout reconnaissance aircraft that can provide electronic support to the fleet. It can kind of serve as the eyes and the ears of the fleet. It can provide electronic warfare, jamming, so on and so forth. It can also be fitted with more combat-oriented gear, not so it's primarily a fighter, although it can be used as like a bomber or strike aircraft. But it's still, even in that, more of a support role. For example, directing Vipers, assisting them in their own attacks. And it can be used to transport Colonial Marines, as in like an assault mission, or transport just more as a general sense. It can also be used as a medical evac. Now, this can do a lot of things, but it has to be configured. So you can't just send one Raptor out and it can do all these in one mission. It has to be kind of configured back at base for one or the other. Basically, it has 3 standard configurations. You have a combat load, you have kind of a standard scout reconnaissance load, and then you have a transport loadout. This is pretty similar to a Viper in overall dimensions, but it is much bulkier, thicker, It's about 28 feet long, has a wingspan of about 18.5 feet, and it's nearly 10 foot tall. But whereas a lot of the Viper's dimensions come from its very long nose and tri-wing design, as you see, this has stub wings, but mostly it is just this big cabin. It basically has two sections. You have a cockpit forward kind of command section for pilot and co-pilot. Immediately behind it, you have kind of a small little cabin where the co-pilot can serve as the Echo electronic officer. It's kind of a little cupboard there. And then behind that, you have the main central cabin where it can transport personnel, equipment, whatnot. This is capable of sublight flight with 2 engines. It can operate in atmosphere or in space, of course. And unlike a Viper, it is FTL capable. Now, it has a relatively small short-range drive, capable of 10 to 20 jumps depending on the fuel and the distance. Although it seems like its limitation on range has more to do with the computing ability than the engines, the physical engines themselves, because we see in Season 4 of the series that when Cylon navigation assistants are added, then it can jump quite far. So it seems like the limitation's more on that. And this is an old bird. It's been in the fleet for 40 to 50 years. So it's aging. Still viable, but probably not for a lot longer. Like a lot of the aircraft that were in America and Britain's fleets from the 90s through today, eventually they have to get replaced out. But because it was so configurable, it has stood around. It has quite a few hard points under the belly. Each little stub wing has 2 hard points underneath it. Plus there's another hard port on the wing tip, presumably for lighter munitions. And then on top of that, there are 2 hard points under the fuselage, kind of on the sides. So a total of 8 places to attach things. Plus it has an internal weapons bay. It can carry nuclear or conventional missiles. It can carry bombs. It can carry up to 6 decoy drones, or 4 communications drones, or flare pods or chaff pods. It can also be fitted with 2 20mm cannon with up to 3,000 rounds of ammunition. But again, that's more of a defense or kind of assault, a ground assault thing. For air-to-air, it's pretty much maneuvering like it looks like, kind of a brick. When in the combat role, when it's fully armored up because of the weight and everything else, it can only carry a few people, 4 to 6, plus the 2 officers that fly it. But when it's in a standard role, it can carry up to 8 fully armed and equipped Marines, or 10 or even maybe 12 in an emergency passengers. More than that, and it starts to get into kind of weight limitations. Speaking of, these are not launched from the tubes on a Battlestar, like a Viper. They're too heavy, they're not configured right, so they take off and land from the actual flight deck. And these are standard on Battlestars. We know, for example, the Pegasus had up to 50 Raptors. I don't think we ever really hear how many Galactica has, but we can assume fewer than the Pegasus, so maybe 20 or 25. These are sent out again on long-range scouting missions. They can have pretty good sensors, equipment, that kind of thing. And yeah. We also know that civilians use a variant of the Raptor called an Evac Raptor for like medical and stuff. So it's kind of like a real-world helicopter. In fact, the designer said they kind of based this on the Apache a little bit, which I kind of found a little odd. Seems more based on the Hind to me, but yeah. So what about Colonial 1 over here? This is a very typical Starliner in the Battlestar universe. It's kind of like their 747. This particular one was owned and operated by the Eversun Space Line Corporation, although in some places it was written Intersun, but Eversun seems to be the accepted. It's about 277 feet long, just under 50 feet wide, and 72 feet tall at its tallest point. The center part has a main cabin here for passengers. Forward of it, we have more private quarters, either for meetings or for living facilities. And we also have 4 relatively big cargo bays. It has 2 sublight engines, and these were FTL capable because they had routine flights between the 12 colonies. That's one thing I like about Galactica, the series. It really seemed like it understood how big space was. You know, in the Star Trek universe or Star Wars, they typically don't go light speed FTL inside a solar system. The thing is, even in a solar system, if you wanted to get somewhere, I mean, there's about a 11-minute light minute delay between Earth and Mars. Well, Venus is our next closest, but you get what I'm saying. So even going at half light speed, it would take, let's just say, 30 minutes to get to Mars. Going at a quarter light speed, of course, that goes up and up. So if you're going in the colonies, you would like to do FTL if possible. Makes a lot of sense, because otherwise, journeys between the 2 distant colonies to each other could take days, weeks, even months going at fast sublight, plus consuming fuel, acceleration, deceleration. It's just easier to jump like they do in the series and use your sublights just to, take off and land. This is capable of operating on a planet's surface. We see it landed for a significant period of time. And we know that this general hull design was in the colonies for a long time. It seems like it's just a tried and tested design that was even kind of longer than the Raptors. I think this has been around at least 50, 60 years, based on flashback scenes. But it was a common liner. During the day of the fall, this one was chartered by the colonial government and become Colonial Heavy 798, where it took Secretary Rosalind to the Galactica from Caprica for its decommissioning. It also transported its EMP coils, the old ones, away afterwards. And then 3 hours after it left Galactica, returning to Caprica, the Salon attack happened, and that's when it was in flight, redesignated as Colonial 1. From that point, it became the seat of government, first just for the executive, and then after the destruction of Cloud 9, the quorum of 12 would meet on board. So it also became the meeting place for the legislature. I don't know if the judiciary would also have anything on it or not. Typical passengers were 100 to 150, although after converting 3 of the 4 cargo bays and kind of taking out some bulkheads and going into sardine mode, it can carry up to 500 people in a pinch. I would imagine the laboratories get a little in demand, though. The external design itself is more or less its own thing. We see a couple of these throughout the series, not just Colonial 1. Internally, it's said that the cabin is inspired by the Orion Clipper from 2001: A Space Odyssey. That the cargo hold that we see in the miniseries is actually a real-world car and passenger freighter. And that the cockpit is basically NASA's Space Shuttle Orbital Training Cockpit, at least the original pattern used from the 80s, 90s. So, of course, like much of Battlestar Galactica, it has a real-world inspiration. It seems to be a pretty durable design, too, because we see it attacked various times throughout the series, and we even see a Raptor fly into it, and it survives. I mean, damaged, of course, but a lot of civilian ships wouldn't. So it seems well built, sturdy. These seem like they're built to last, which would make sense for a routine interstellar spacecraft. You know, buy once, cry once type mentality. Of course, you can tell by the size, it's much smaller than Galactica. And that means it can be parked in the hangar deck on the flight pod there, which it does from time to time for protection. It does usually fly external to Galactica, but near it, and also Galactica has a wing of Vipers that routinely patrol it and provide security. Speaking of, we see the crew, the Eversun crew, throughout the series, including the pilot. They're very much modeled after airline employees. And also we know that Colonial 1 has its own security force. It doesn't just rely on Galactica as its own police force or whatnot. Yep. So a little more on each of these. I mean, you can also check out my original videos that I did on both. But yeah, I put the Raptor in this video because civilians do use it, and it's not a primarily offensive military craft. It was used often in the series to scout out for resources, also search and rescue. These were used a lot as hospital. So the models themselves are pretty awesome. I was always looking forward to the Raptor, and I'm not disappointed. As I've said in the other videos, I like it when these are heavy. This one's relatively light, but that's kind of to be expected with all the detailing and stuff, that they're going to have to use a lot more plastic on it. So I'll give it a pass. It still has some decent weight, and of course the main cabin is still metal. Wings and whatnot are plastic. But the Colonial 1 actually really impressed me. You'd think it might be our longest one so far. And it's quite heavy. The main body's metal. The little skirt or fins in the back are plastic. And the hump here is plastic. But overall, it's got a good little weight and size to it. It's kind of the only one in the collection in this scale. The Raptor more or less scales well with the Vipers we've received, and the Raiders for the most part. And of course, the Battlestars and the Base Stars have their own scale. But Colonial 1 has its own kind of in-between. It'll be interesting to see if they do any more civilian ships or shuttles or anything like that, because they pretty much have done the entire hero set now. I guess it just depends how well they sell. I just looked, it's January 3rd when I'm recording this, And it's towards the evening, and so far Eaglemoss has not announced what issue 14 will be yet. This is issue 13, and frankly it just came out, so I received mine, as I said in the first video, on Christmas Eve. But I figured might as well look at these. It's been a very cool little collection. Having the Raptor next to the Vipers really does complete kind of that. And they were a major part of the series since really from the beginning to the end. I mean, I think the Raptor is one of the last ships we see flying, as Adama takes one to Earth with Rosalind body. And we see it in the miniseries, this one here, Boomers. And this is something that the miniseries kind of thought up. There was no real Raptor analog in the original series. I mean, they had shuttles, but that was as close as they came. So, and it's definitely something, the real, you know, if it were real, that a military would definitely want to have as a multi-mission configurable craft, because you just don't know. It is neat. But yeah, kind of my 2020 relook, I guess. They didn't really set out to do it like that, but yeah, I have fun talking about these and whatnot. So, there you go. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And if you haven't, you might enjoy checking out some of my other videos. Or maybe not. I don't know. I don't know you. You know you. Do what makes you happy. Hope your January is going well. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Next time.